So, just what exactly happened in South Korea? On the 3rd of December 2024, the country's president stunned the world by announcing that he'd imposed martial law. And yet, hours later, he was forced to rescind a decree and order the troops back to their barracks. But while many may have seen the incident as a bizarre development in one of Asia's strongest democracies, it was in fact far more serious than it seemed. For many, it was a worrying reminder of a dark chapter in the country's past that many thought had been consigned to the history books. Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. One of the most significant challenges a country can face is the transition from authoritarian military rule to democracy. Around the world, numerous states have faced this test with varying degrees of success. While some have quickly fallen back under the control of the armed forces, others have traded military rule for civilian authoritarianism. But even when a country appears to have finally moved entirely beyond its dictatorial past and embraced democracy, sometimes the legacy of previous events can resurface again. This was most recently highlighted by events in South Korea. Having spent decades under repressive military rule, the country appeared to have become a strong and stable democracy over the past 30 years. And yet, all this was seemingly thrown into doubt when the president suddenly announced on live television that he was putting the military back on the streets and introducing a raft of repressive measures aimed at curbing political activity and restricting many fundamental freedoms. The Republic of Korea, more usually known as South Korea, is located in East Asia. Its population is around 52 million. While the country is officially a presidential republic, with the president serving as both head of state and head of government, it has certain features of a parliamentary system, such as a prime minister. The country also has a single-chamber parliament, the National Assembly, with 300 members. Elected directly by citizens for a single 5-year term, the president has wide-ranging executive authority. This includes appointing the prime minister and ministers, directing foreign policy and commanding the military. The current holder is Yoon Suk-yeol, who took office in 2022. Our story starts in the aftermath of the Second World War. After 35 years of brutal occupation, Korea was liberated from Japanese occupation by the Allies. However, as the Cold War took hold, the superpowers divided the country along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviet Union established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in 1948, led by Kim Il-sung. Meanwhile, in the south, the United States oversaw the creation of the Republic of Korea, led by the country's first president, Syngman Rhee. In the years that followed, tensions steadily grew between the two sides. This all came to a head on the 25th of June 1950, when North Korea invaded the south to reunify the peninsula under communist rule. But while North Korean troops initially made significant advances, United Nations forces operating under US command pushed them back. Facing defeat, the North was saved by neighbouring communist China, and after 3 years of brutal conflict, the Korean War came to an end in 1953 with an armistice that left the peninsula divided along the same line as it had been originally. In the aftermath of the war, South Korea faced enormous challenges. Along with the ongoing threat from the north, it faced political instability and continuing economic problems, including widespread corruption. Faced with growing opposition to his rule, Rhee became steadily more authoritarian, suppressing dissent to retain power. This all came to a head in April 1960. Amidst public anger over vote fixing, mass protests forced Rhee to resign and go into exile in Hawaii, where he died 4 years later. However, any hopes that this would open the way for democracy were short-lived. While a new president was elected just months later, political instability continued, and on the 16th of May 1961, the military launched a coup. Led by General Park Chung-hee, the Director General of Army Operations, who argued that it was needed to restore order and promote growth, it would mark the start of almost 3 decades of military control. While the country was initially overseen by a military committee, the Supreme Council of National Reconstruction, elections were held in December 1963 and Park became president. Over the next 16 years, he ran a highly authoritarian regime focused on economic development. But while the country saw rapid industrialisation, social and political freedoms were severely restricted. Opponents of the government were imprisoned and the media was heavily censored. Meanwhile, a new constitution, introduced in 1972, granted the president even more powers. However, all this came to an end on the 26th of October 1979, when the head of the intelligence service assassinated Park, an event that's still subject to considerable controversy to this day. While there were again hopes that South Korea could return to democracy, the military retook control just months later under General Chun Doo-hwan, the head of military counterintelligence. As pro-democracy protests erupted, he imposed martial law and brutally cracked down on the demonstrations, leading to hundreds of deaths. But while Chun, who became president in 1980, continued to suppress any opposition, calls for democracy nevertheless continued to grow. With the world's attention focused on the country, which was preparing to hold the 1988 Olympic Games, mass protests forced Chun from power at the end of his constitutionally mandated single 7-year term. In his place, another general, Rhee Tae-woo, won the presidential elections in December 1987, promising to return the country to civilian-led democracy. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. In 1993, South Korea gained its first civilian president after 30 years of repressive military control. Under Kim Young-sam, the country quickly began consolidating democracy and limiting the military's political power. In addition to overseeing the retirement of many senior generals, he prosecuted Chun Doo-hwan and Rhee Tae-woo for corruption and their role in the 1979 coup and the subsequent crackdowns. Steps were also taken to increase transparency, reform electoral laws, improve press freedom, and strengthen civilian control over state institutions. And in 1998, South Korea again went to the polls. This time, the opposition leader, Kim Dae-jung, won the election. This would mark a particularly crucial period for the country. In addition to consolidating democracy through further reforms, he promoted better relations with North Korea, the so-called Sunshine Policy, thereby easing the insecurity that had long been a pillar of military control. All this was internationally recognised in 2000 when Kim won the Nobel Peace Prize. Since then, South Korea has steadily moved beyond its authoritarian past. Despite the continuing tensions with the North, the country has opened up to the world. As well as its ever-growing cultural influence, it became widely regarded as one of the most open and democratic states in Asia, with regular competitive elections. And while problems do continue to exist, for example with corruption and gender equality, it's nevertheless become a politically stable and pluralistic society and a model of post-military democratisation. Or so it seemed. It was against this backdrop that the world watched in complete shock as President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in a late-night emergency television address on the 3rd of December 2024, citing the need to protect the nation from pro-North Korean threats and to safeguard its constitutional order. He accused the opposition Democratic Party of engaging in anti-state activities and attempting to overthrow the government. The decree introduced a broad range of harsh measures. In addition to media restrictions, it prohibited all political activity and suspended fundamental rights such as the freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. At the same time, the military was given the power to arrest people. All this sparked an immediate backlash. Condemning the decree as an illegal act, the leader of the opposition called on the country to resist the measures. And as demonstrations erupted, clashes broke out between protesters and security forces. Meanwhile, acting on the orders of the army commander, soldiers tried to seal off the National Assembly. But despite this, 190 lawmakers managed to make it into the parliament, and just hours after the announcement, they unanimously passed a resolution revoking the declaration of martial law. Faced with overwhelming parliamentary and public opposition, Yoon quickly backed down, and just hours after it was imposed, martial law was lifted. So, just what exactly was behind these extraordinary developments? Many theories have been proposed. Given that Yoon officially justified the move on national security grounds, especially amidst growing tensions with North Korea, some have argued that he may have wanted to show strength to the northern regime at a critical moment. While this could in fact be the case, many observers see it as more politically motivated by domestic factors. Although Yoon had been a well-respected prosecutor before assuming the presidency in 2022, he's nevertheless been embroiled in numerous scandals since taking office. As his popularity has declined, the country's seen increasing protests and strikes. Meanwhile, the president's also been embroiled in various battles with political opponents. Some have suggested that the move was therefore a woefully misjudged way to reassert his authority, but others have been far more forthright, calling the decision nothing less than an attempted coup. Of course, regardless of the reasons behind it, it raises many other important questions. To start with, there's the issue of what happens to Yoon now. Amidst calls for his resignation, impeachment proceedings have already begun in the National Assembly. As a result, there's a growing sense that it's unlikely that he'll reach the end of his term in 2027. But even if he does cling to power, there may well be a clamour for him to face trial for his actions. But there's another critical aspect to this story. The fact that senior military commanders appeared to accept the plan is highly worrying. While one could say that they were merely responding to a president's command and thus respecting the democratically elected leader's decision, they should and would have been aware of the broader political implications of the decision given the country's past. This may again open questions about the role of the military. In addition, the incident may open the way for other constitutional debates. For example, it could reignite calls for the country to move away from a presidential system and towards a parliamentary executive system, with the president perhaps becoming little more than a ceremonial figurehead. But whatever happens next, this bizarre but dangerous incident has served as a disturbing reminder of a dark chapter in South Korean history that many observers, both in the country and abroad, had thought was long gone. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.